Every day we see updates about the Russia and Ukraine war. Missile strikes, drones, new weapons, more losses. But there's a dark side of this war that most people never hear about. Why are some countries still trading with both sides? Why did Russian oil exports grow even after global sanctions? And how are Ukrainian weapons ending up in places they shouldn't? There are lots of secret deals happening behind closed doors. Big profits are being made while people are dying, and many don't want you to know what's really going on. But in this video, I'm going to reveal the hidden truth behind the Russia-Ukraine war, the global games, and the reasons this conflict keeps dragging on. When you watch the news, you'll often hear that the Russia-Ukraine war started in 2022, but that's not true. To understand the full picture, you have to go back to 2014. That year, something big happened in Ukraine. Thousands of people filled the streets of Kyiv during what's now known as the Euromaidan protests. They were angry that their president, Viktor Yanukovych, rejected a deal with the European Union and chose to stay close to Russia instead. Protesters called for change, and after weeks of unrest, Yanukovych fled the country. That's when things escalated. Russia moved quickly. In March 2014, Russian troops entered Crimea, a peninsula in southern Ukraine. Within weeks, Russia took control and held a rushed referendum to make it official. But that was just the start. Not long after, fighting broke out in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Pro-Russian separatists, backed by Moscow, began a bloody conflict with Ukrainian forces. But Russia chose to pause the war. It went quiet for a while, but never fully ended. And surprisingly, some of the same fighters, weapons, and tactics used back then are now back in the spotlight today. So when people say the war started in 2022, they're missing 8 years of buildup of battles, broken promises, and rising tension. And once we look at what happened in the years between, it becomes clear why this war didn't just appear out of nowhere. But the biggest question of this century is, why did Russia go to war now? A lot of headlines point to NATO as the reason. And yes, that's one part of it. But the truth is, Russia had several reasons: political, strategic, and deeply personal for its leadership. First, Russia wanted to regain influence over Ukraine. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Moscow has viewed Ukraine as a country that should remain under its orbit. Ukraine is big, rich in resources, and shares deep historical, cultural, and family ties with Russia. Losing it to the West wasn't just a political blow, it felt like a humiliation. For Putin and those around him, bringing Ukraine back is about restoring Russia's place as a global power. Then there's the fear of NATO expansion. Over the years, NATO has moved east, adding countries like Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states. Ukraine wasn't a NATO member, but the possibility of it joining in the future triggered panic in Moscow. They didn't want US weapons, military bases, or intelligence systems sitting right at their border. Putin called this a direct threat, even though the West insisted it was defensive. At the same time, Ukraine was moving closer to the West, joining trade deals, getting support from Europe, and building new political and economic ties. Trade agreements with the European Union, Western aid, and growing support from democratic countries made it clear that Ukraine wanted out of Russia's influence. This shift was slow but steady, and from the Kremlin's view, it was slipping away. These are the reasons everyone talks about, but I think the biggest reason was fear. Russia didn't want Ukraine to become a free and open country where people could vote out leaders, protest without fear, and choose their own path. Because if Ukrainians had that freedom, people in Russia might start asking for the same, and that was something Putin didn't want to deal with. But how do they plan to attack? By late 2021, satellite images showed tens of thousands of Russian troops gathering near Ukraine's borders. At first, it looked like another pressure tactic. Russia had moved troops before and then backed off. But this time, it was different. In February 2022, Russian tanks crossed the Ukrainian border from 3 directions: Belarus in the north, Crimea in the south, and Russia itself in the east. At the same time, missiles hit airports, command centers, and cities across the country. It wasn't a warning shot, it was a full-scale invasion. Putin called it a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, terms that raised eyebrows globally. Putin's plan seemed clear: send troops to Kyiv, remove the government, and put someone in charge who would listen to Moscow. In the first few days, Russian forces got just 20 miles away from the capital. But something changed. Ukrainian forces, led by President Zelensky, didn't back down. Regular people joined in. Some picked up rifles, others made Molotov cocktails. Volunteers blocked roads and built defenses overnight. What Russia thought would be a quick 3-day attack turned into a major failure. Low morale, poor supply lines, fuel shortages, and major tactical errors forced Russian troops to retreat from Kyiv by April. They left behind ruined tanks, damaged pride, and images that shocked the world, from the Bucha massacre to destroyed suburbs. And behind the scenes, a new war front had opened. The West, was now involved. Billions in weapons started coming in, things like Javelin missiles, HIMARS rocket systems, drones, and high-tech support. The US, UK, EU, and others began training Ukrainian troops, sending gear, and even helping with real-time info from the battlefield. NATO didn't send its own soldiers, but it was fully involved behind the scenes. That changed everything, and it set the stage for a much bigger fight. With Kyiv out of reach, Russia changed its strategy. Now the focus was the Donbas, a region in eastern Ukraine that had already seen years of low-level war. Since 2014, Donbas has coal, industry, and a heavy Russian-speaking population. It was also the area where pro-Russian separatists had already declared fake people's republics. Russia began hitting it with everything it had: airstrikes, artillery, and waves of infantry. Cities like Severodonetsk and Bakhmut turned into war zones. Entire blocks were flattened. The fighting was close and slow, street by street, trench by trench. Ukraine kept fighting hard. Sometimes they moved forward, sometimes they lost ground, but the damage was massive. Meanwhile, Russia didn't stop at Donbas. Strikes continued on Kharkiv in the northeast. They took Mariupol in the south after a long siege that destroyed most of the city. They tried to expand west, threatening Odessa and attacking power grids across the country. Missiles hit civilian buildings, train stations, and malls, and this sent a clear message: no place was safe. And while this was happening, new players were stepping in. Iran sent deadly drones to help Russia. North Korea provided ammo and rockets. At the same time, Western countries backed Ukraine. Germany sent tanks, the US gave air defense systems, and the UK supplied long-range missiles. Ukraine had strong allies. But Russia wasn't alone either. With support from Iran, North Korea, Belarus, and quiet help from China, both sides were now backed by powerful partners. Still, a lot of people see this war as a fight for territory. But under the surface, it's also a fight for resources, and the world knows it. Ukraine has some of the biggest unused lithium reserves in Europe. And with the world moving fast toward electric cars and clean energy, that's a big deal. Whoever controls that lithium could control a big piece of the future. And then there's grain. Before the war, Ukraine was feeding over 400 million people worldwide. Its wheat, barley, and sunflower oil were lifelines for countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Russia didn't just want to block Ukraine's ports, it also wanted to control the grain routes. On top of that, Ukraine has massive natural gas deposits in its east. If fully developed, they could help Europe reduce its dependency on Russia, something Moscow doesn't want. So while tanks roll and bombs fall, there's a quieter war happening over food, fuel, and minerals, and the West is watching every move. And this brings up another question. Is this really a Ukraine-Russia war, or has it turned into something much bigger? Moscow says this war is just a proxy fight, with NATO secretly running things from behind the scenes. And sure, the West has sent a lot of help: missiles, tanks, drones, and billions in support. But there are no NATO soldiers fighting on the ground. This is still Ukraine's war to fight. Still, things aren't so simple. The US shares live satellite data. Europe trains Ukrainian troops. British missiles hit Russian ships. So even if NATO isn't officially in the war, it's clearly involved. And Putin's worst fear came true. Finland joined NATO in 2023, doubling Russia's border with the alliance. Instead of pushing NATO back, the war brought it closer. But beyond geopolitics and alliances, there's a deeper price being paid by people on the ground. Behind every headline is a human cost. In Bucha, satellite photos and eyewitnesses showed bodies lying in the streets, hands tied, shot at close range. Russia called it fake, but the world called it a massacre. Thousands of civilians have been killed. Millions have fled their homes, seeking shelter in Poland, Germany, and beyond. Entire cities like Mariupol were reduced to rubble. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin in 2023, accusing him of illegally deporting children from occupied Ukraine. Some reports have even compared his actions to Adolf Hitler, claiming Putin is following the same dark path of war crimes, terror, and control. But what's true is still buried underground. And now in 2025, the war hasn't ended. The eastern regions are still war zones. Places like Donetsk and Luhansk, once busy industrial cities, are now full of ruins and gunfire. Ukraine has even carried out small attacks across the Russian border. They're not large in scale, but they send a clear message: we won't stop at our borders anymore. If you come for us, we'll come for you. At the same time, reports say Russia has brought in soldiers from North Korea. A surprising move for a war that many thought would last just a few weeks. And peace talks, they're nowhere to be found. Both sides are stuck. Neither wants to back down. And countries around the world keep sending money and weapons to fuel the fight. But how does this war actually end? Or does it? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.